Next, we're going to hear from Gus Blanchard, who's retired chairman of the board of ADC Telecommunications, who's here to introduce us to Outstanding Director Lois Martin. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Gus Blanchard.
Good evening. It has, I want to acknowledge up front, occurred to Lois and to me that we have on our tags the name of a company that no longer exists. ADC was eventually bought and absorbed into a much bigger company and doesn't exist anymore in the form that it did when we both worked for it. Nevertheless, I think there's a story to be told, and let me briefly cause you to wait on ADC till I make a couple of comments about the Deluxe Corporation, also of the Twin Cities. The significance really is this. The company had challenges of obvious nature and some not so obvious. In the mid-90s, check printing was beginning to fade. The end was somewhere out there. And so I was invited by the board to come and be the CEO of Deluxe. When I got there, I began looking immediately for some free-thinking talent that was not wedded to all of the previous 75 years of a wonderful company's existence. I found her in an unusual spot. I'll show my biases now. She was in the finance shop, specifically the internal audit shop. And I guess I was thinking that I'd find that sort of talent in various parts of the company, but not necessarily in accounting, and shows how wrong I was. Very quickly, over the next several years, as we transformed Deluxe from something that it had been to quite a different company, Lois rose through the finance and accounting organizations between 95 and 2000 to become the chief financial officer of what at the time was $1.5 billion corporation. Along the way, she had developed skills as Deluxe had gone through opening multiple companies in India. How do you financially account for something like that? We were going through the closing of check printing plants no longer required. We were looking at new business units to get involved with. And ultimately, we decided to split the company into a check printing and all of the non-check printing to be called eFunds Corporation. Lois saw all of that passing in front of her and was a most important contributor throughout. My biggest complaint at the time was that when we created eFunds and moved it to Scottsdale, and I went as its CEO, I couldn't get Lois and Tom and their family to move to Scottsdale with me. But that's the story for another day. So here we are then a bit later. ADC Telecom in Eden Prairie is riding a technology bubble of massive proportions about the year 2000. I became an ADC director by virtue of one of the multiple acquisitions ADC was putting in place. For one brief shining moment, virtually all telecom shares were at record heights. ADC recorded its first $1 billion quarter, and the company's PE was somewhere north of 40. Barely a year later, annual revenues were less than $700 million. More than half of the employee body had been laid off, more to follow. Product lines were dropped, managers left. CEO of longstanding had retired. We had recruited a new one who watched for about a year and said, "Not for me," and left. And we eventually ended up dividing the CEO from the board chair roles, and I was elected in that role, and we internally picked the right new chief executive officer as the president. We needed new directors. Well, who wants to join a boat like the ADC Titanic? We had laid off half the people. The revenues were down to 30% or 20% of what they had been. Morale was poor. The future was cloudy. And Lois said yes when I called and said, "Would you consider coming aboard as a director of ADC?" She had no technology training and upbringing per se, or not much in any event. She hadn't done a lot of what ADC did, but I knew what she was capable of as a leader and as an executive, and I thought her skills as CFO would translate very easily into board member, and she proved me right almost immediately. We had a tech-heavy board of existing directors, multiple boards by each name, and the group as a whole started to work and help Lois by coaching here, pointing out some opportunities there. And in no time at all, she had built a reputation for not only integrity and insight, but for good listening and receptivity to the needs of the company, and ultimately a vitally important member of the management team, of the board team. When the head of the Finance and Audit Committee retired, there was no question in anybody's mind that Lois was to be that new Audit Committee chair, and she was and remained until the company finally was absorbed. Bottom line, you learn as much from the knocks and the tough jobs, maybe more, as you do from the simple ones. If you're fortunate along the way, you find a person of talent, not necessarily vast experience, but commitment, belief in what you're trying to do, willingness to put in some hard work. And if you're lucky enough to find a person like that, great things follow. They have for ADC, they certainly did at Deluxe, and it is my great pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce to you all Miss Lois Martin.
Thank you, Gus, for those very kind words and for the opportunity to serve on the ADC board. Thank you also to the contingent from Delta Dental, both members of the board and management team, who I now have the privilege to serve with, to friends and colleagues who are taking precious personal time to be here, and to Dale and Twin Cities Business for creating the opportunity to honor so many great Minnesota companies. I'd also like to recognize tonight's other honorees, Wheelock, Mike, Janelle, and Dennis. I'm humbled and honored to stand here with you. And I'd also like to recognize my unconditional support structure and loves of my life, my husband Tom, and our two daughters, Marissa and Allison. So I have to share that when Dale called me regarding this award, I thought he had the wrong person. But then he kept saying Lois, and I don't know about many of you, but I don't know a lot of Loises, and most of them are dead. So anyway, because people born in the last century haven't been called Lois, but my parents were into vintage before vintage was a thing. So anyway, all kidding aside, I'm honored but also a bit uncomfortable with the recognition. As I'm sure you would all agree, board effectiveness is only a result of a team and collective effort. The only way, in my mind, you can be an outstanding director is if you have the honor of serving with other exceptional directors. And the peers I served with at ADC were just that, exceptional. As Gus mentioned, ADC was my first public company independent board role. When I joined, as Gus mentioned, it was dire days. It was post.com and subsequent telecom market implosions. But what I found was it was a board who had done deep, deep introspection, post those severe changes, to learn what they could have done, should have done, to anticipate what had happened. Interestingly, the board shared with me that one of their key learnings was lack of diversity, but it was diversity beyond gender and race. They were lacking diversity in expertise, in leadership styles, experience, and most importantly, non-telecom industry background. And success did follow ADC after those dark days. We grew, we became relevant, financially stable, and then just as we were all thinking things were good in the land of Oz, came again this new wave of market disruption. Severe and significant consolidation amongst huge key customers, which put into question the viability of all of the suppliers in the space. As a result, the board then became completely focused on long-term strategy, market differentiation, and our options, and what we could do to continue to increase shareholder value and relevance to our customers in the midst of another unprecedented market disruption. And one of the most difficult things is the acknowledgement amongst ourselves that a go-alone strategy may not be the only viable option. As such, when we received a friendly but unsolicited offer, we were prepared and we were able to drive a very competitive process to ensure the best outcome for ADC and its shareholders. As I think we all know, early experiences can be disproportionately impactful to our learning and understanding. So I'm extremely grateful that my initial board experience was on ADC. Not only for the unique experiences, but because I got to witness firsthand how a best-in-class board works. A best-in-class board and its chair is clear on its role and responsibilities. It believes in the company and its management team. It welcomes and facilitates questions and debate of differing perspectives. It's forward-thinking and is prepared for potentially likely future events. And to me, very important, it disagrees, but it's never disagreeable. As I reflected on my ADC and other board experiences, it actually struck me that my parents were my original teachers and role models, providing me meaningful insight on what it takes to be an effective director. Because a director, in my mind, is an advocate, a believer in all the company can do. It is your biggest supporter, it has your back, but it doesn't do so blindly. It at times must also be a challenger and questioner. And that is what my parents were. As a director, as it is a parent, your role is to support and to help grow the company with an understanding it is not yours to control or use for your own purposes. As a director, you are a fiduciary, a parent whose responsibility it is to help launch this entity into much greater things. Their success is your success. So tonight, I accept this award on behalf of all the ADC board members and our incredible chair, Gus Blanchard. And a special thank you to my parents, from whom I've learned so many lifelong skills. And also to my mom, who couldn't be here tonight, and to my dearly missed father. In light of the tremendous gifts you have given me, I forgive you for naming me Lois. You've more than made up for it. Thank you.